sun that spilled its last honeyed light across the earth. Dust rose in gentle swirls behind the slow measured steps of a tired horse, its rider sitting tall and quiet in the saddle, the folds of her travel-worn skirt catching the breeze like ship sails on an unseen tide. Rose Dunn Whitlock carried the weight of 100 unspoken hopes inside the worn satchel pressed to her side. Beneath the leather flap, folded with trembling care, lay the letter. The one that had changed everything. The one that promised something she had never known outside of faded dreams. A place to belong, a heart to call hers, hands that might steady the storms within her. She shifted slightly, her back aching from the long ride, and the town of Willow Creek slowly unfurled before her, a smattering of buildings clinging to the earth as if they too feared the loneliness that howled across the open plains. Smoke curled from a blacksmith's chimney. A church steeple caught the light and threw it back toward the heavens. Children darted between wooden storefronts, their laughter carried thin and high on the wind. She was not what men dreamed of. That had been told to her in whispered warnings and pitying glances since girlhood. Her height, they said, would frighten suitors. Her quiet ways would unsettle neighbors. Her long arms and broader shoulders, better suited to a farmhand than a lady, were things to be hidden, apologized for, endured. But the letter had spoken differently. Henry Dobbs, a blacksmith seeking a wife, had written of wanting a sturdy woman, one who could handle the hard truths of ranch life. He had needed strength. Rose Dunn had believed she might finally be enough. The horses' hoofs clattered hollowly against the wooden planks of the main street. Townsfolk slowed their errands, curiosity blooming in their faces. Her cheeks flamed, but she kept her chin lifted, her hands steady on the reins. At the far end of the street, beside the blacksmith's forge, stood a man wiping soot from his hands with a cloth. Henry Dobbs. He was broad in the shoulders, hair a thatch of dark waves, his brow heavy with a perpetual scowl born of hammer and fire. Their eyes met. Rose Dunn offered a soft, uncertain smile. Henry's face shifted, not into joy or welcome but into something colder. His gaze traveled the long length of her figure, from her scuffed boots up to where her sun-touched hair tumbled from beneath her bonnet. His lips tightened and he dropped the cloth into the dust. He approached with a hesitance that soured Rose Dunn's stomach. The onlookers, sensing something fragile in the air, leaned in without moving. "You're Rose Dunn?" he asked, voice gruff. "I am," she said, her voice carrying more steadiness than her heart felt. Henry rubbed the back of his neck, glancing away. A bead of sweat traced his temple despite the coolness settling over the land. I thought," he began, faltering like a man stepping onto rotten ice. "I thought you'd be smaller." The words sliced cleaner than any blade. Not cruelly said but cruelly meant. A shame he could not hide colored his face. Rose Dunn said nothing. She knew how this would unfold. She had seen it in the eyes of would-be suitors back home, the same weighing, the same dismissal. "I can't. I don't think this will work," Henry muttered, shifting from foot to foot. "No offense, miss, but it ain't what I had in mind." The street held its breath. Somewhere, a dog barked and the sound seemed deafening. Rose Dunn nodded once, stiffly, a motion sharp as a snapped twig. Without another word, she turned her horse toward the boarding house at the edge of town, leaving Henry, the townsfolk, and the shattering echo of hope behind her. The room the boarding mistress gave her smelled faintly of old biscuits and faded lilac water. Rose Dunn unpacked slowly, laying her few belongings in neat lines across the narrow bed. She traced the edge of the letter with her fingertip, feeling its promises bleed away under her touch. She ate no supper. Hunger curled in her belly, but grief fed upon it first. Instead, she found herself drawn to the back porch, where wild grass grew thick and stubborn, and a lopsided bench sagged beneath the weight of forgotten seasons. The sun had nearly dipped below the hills, setting the world aflame with colors so vivid it seemed an apology from heaven itself. Reds and golds and bruised purples washed over the fields, the trees, the lonely figure of Rose Dunn sitting small against the vastness. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the wind teasing strands of hair free to dance across her face. Tears gathered at the edges of her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. Crying solved nothing. She had known that since she was a child left to stitch her own dresses and patch her own shoes. She had not come to this place to be pitied. She had come for a new beginning. That it had slipped through her fingers like dry prairie dust did not mean the dream had died. It only meant she would have to find another way. From somewhere near the blacksmith's forge, voices rose, laughter, the clanging of a hammer. Life went on, indifferent to one woman's quiet heartbreak. But far beyond the noise, standing at the edge of his own fields, a man named Jonas Carter leaned against a fence rail and watched the setting sun paint the sky. His eyes, worn but kind, drifted to the faint figure on the boarding-house porch, a silhouette framed by fading light. He saw not her height, nor the rejection that clung to her like morning mist. He saw only the way she sat so still as if stitched into the earth itself. He saw strength dressed in sorrow. He saw a woman who had carried herself to the very edge of the world, carrying a letter too heavy for hope, and yet still sat upright against the coming night. Jonas tipped his hat lower against the wind, the corner of his mouth twitching into the ghost of a smile. Some things, he thought, were better built high enough to reach the stars. And some souls, once noticed, could never be forgotten. The days unfolded like old paper, creased and worn, under the breath of a softer sun. Rose Dunn stayed on at the boarding house, each morning rising before the roosters crow, moving through town like a ghost stitched into the seams of a world that barely noticed. But not everyone was blind. Jonas Carter, the quiet rancher whose land spread wide beyond the crooked river, found his gaze drawn to her as if by an invisible thread. It wasn't the way she towered over the other women that held him, nor the sadness that clung to her hem like burrs. It was the way she moved with careful kindness, as if the very earth beneath her feet deserved gentleness. He saw her first when she knelt in the dusty churchyard, mending a broken cross with twine and patience. Later, at the general store, he watched her stand back while others hurried, letting the elder townsfolk take their turn first, even when the wind bit through her thin coat. There was no fanfare to Rose Dunn Whitlock. No flare of color, no sharp laugh to chase away notice. She was the hush between songs, the stillness before rain, the quiet ache in a lonely man's chest he hadn't known how to name until he saw her. One afternoon, as Jonas loaded sacks of feed onto his wagon, a sudden gust whipped through Willow Creek, tearing a bundle of freshly laundered linens from the preacher's wife's arms. White sheets flapped like frantic birds, scattering across the road. Without hesitation, Rose Dunn dropped her basket and rushed to help. She moved faster than her size suggested, chasing down the rebellious linens with long, graceful strides. Jonas stood watching, a slow smile rising under the shadow of his hat. When Rose Dunn handed the rescued linens back, the preacher's wife squeezed her hand in gratitude. Jonas saw the flicker of surprise in Rose Dunn's eyes at being thanked, as if kindness returned to her was a language rarely spoken. The wildflowers began blooming early that spring, stubborn against the lingering chill. Rose Dunn noticed them first, a riot of yellow and purple along the fence lines and riverbanks. They were not delicate blooms but hardy things, their roots sunk deep into soil others deemed too rough for beauty. One morning she found herself wandering beyond the town's edge, following the crooked path of wild blossoms. They led her to a stretch of broken fence where a man knelt, tools scattered around him, wrestling with a gate that refused to hang true. Jonas glanced up as she approached, his forehead creased with the familiar frustration of stubborn wood and rusted hinges. He tipped his hat, an easy motion, a greeting meant for equals, not strangers. She hesitated, then spoke in that soft, lilting way that made even the dry air seem sweeter. "Would you like a hand with that?" Jonas chuckled low in his chest, stepping aside without argument. Rose Dunn studied the gate, the way it sagged heavy on its hinges, pulling against itself. She lifted it with a practiced hand, years of farm work teaching her the dance of weight and balance, and Jonas drove the final nail in with a solid swing. When they tested it, the gate swung smooth and true, creaking like an old fiddle finding its voice. "Well," Jonas said, straightening, "looks like it just needed someone stubborn enough to see it through." Their eyes met, and for the first time Rose Dunn saw no judgment flicker there. Only a quiet gladness, like warm coals banked against the cold. They parted without ceremony, but something invisible tethered them across the fields, a pull neither fully understood yet could not deny. In the days that followed, small encounters stitched their lives closer. A nod at the store. A shared glance at Sunday service. A moment where Jonas paused his work just to watch her walk by, her skirts brushing the tops of wildflowers like a blessing. Rose Dunn found herself lingering near the window of the boarding house at dusk, her eyes tracing the distant line of his ranch where smoke curled lazily into the sky. One evening, as she carried a small sack of flour back to her room, Jonas rode past on his bay gelding, the horse's hooves striking a steady rhythm against the hard-packed road. He slowed, tipping his hat again, the brim catching the molten hues of the setting sun. "You favor wildflowers, Miss Whitlock?" he asked, voice like low thunder on a summer night. Rose Dunn smiled, a real one this time, shy but steady. "They grow where they're not always wanted," she said. "But they stay anyway." Jonas nodded, as if she'd spoken a truth he already knew but had forgotten how to say aloud. "Seems to me the world could use more of him," he said, and with a touch to his reins he rode on. The boarding house walls felt closer that night, the rooms too small to hold the thoughts blooming wild and unchecked in Rose Dunn's mind. She pressed her hand to the glass, feeling the last warmth of the day fading under her fingertips, and let herself wonder, not in desperate hope as before but in quiet curiosity, if perhaps some roots were meant to find new soil. The next morning brought another soft miracle. The preacher's wife, grateful beyond measure, invited Rose Dunn to a picnic planned at the Carter Ranch, a modest gathering of neighbors before the first planting of the season. Rose Dunn hesitated, fear snagging against the fragile thread of hope she was learning to weave again. But when she glimpsed Jonas Carter beyond the fence, mending a wagon wheel with sure, patient hands, she knew she would go. Not for promises, not for dreams stitched too tightly, but for the chance to stand beneath an open sky and let herself be seen. The day of the picnic, the air carried the scent of turned earth and wild onion. Children shrieked in delight as they raced through the tall grasses, their laughter blending with the buzz of bees and the low murmur of adult conversation. Rose Dunn stood at the edge for a long time watching. Jonas spotted her almost at once. He didn't wave or shout across the fields. He simply made his way to her, slow and deliberate, like a man walking toward something he already belonged to. "You came," he said, a simple truth rather than a question. Rose Dunn nodded, her hands twisting nervously in her skirts. Jonas offered his arm, a gesture as natural as breathing. After a heartbeat's hesitation, Rose Dunn placed her hand there, feeling the solid strength beneath the homespun shirt. They walked together among the wildflowers that grew untamed along the fence line, speaking of small things, the stubbornness of calves, the sweetness of wild honey, the coming rains. Nothing grand, nothing heavy, just the slow stitching of two lives side by side. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields, Jonas led her to a small rise overlooking the pasture. The sky blazed with the same fierce beauty Rose Dunn had seen on the day of her arrival, but tonight it did not seem to burn alone. It wrapped around her like a blessing. Jonas turned toward her, his face lit gold by the dying light. "Funny thing about wildflowers," he said. "Folk call 'em weeds sometimes. Say they don't belong. But they don't see how they hold the earth together when the storms come." Rose Dunn swallowed against the ache rising in her throat. "You're not what I expected," Jonas said, his voice roughened by something deeper than shyness. "You're better." The words settled into the empty places inside her, filling them not with noise but with peace. The breeze caught the hem of her skirt, the ribbons in her hair, the whispered prayers she didn't even know she'd spoken. And there, under the wide, forgiving sky, Rose Dunn Whitlock dared, for the first time in her life, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had been made exactly right. Somewhere far below the horizon, storms gathered, old fears waited to rise. But for now, the world was nothing but golden light, open fields, and the steady beating of two hearts learning how to hope again. The days grew warmer, the land swelling with the slow pulse of spring, and life in Willow Creek stirred with new rhythms. Seeds were pressed into the thawed earth, fences mended, promises made in the unspoken language of those who knew the land's quiet mercies. Rose Dunn found herself drawn more and more to the Carter Ranch, not by invitation but by the gentle tide of small needs that seemed always to arise. A wagon in need of a second set of hands. A wayward calf requiring coaxing from a thicket. A basket of early peas gathered for the preacher's wife, who suddenly found herself limping with a twisted ankle. No one said it aloud, but Rose Dunn's presence wove itself into the days like the scent of clover after rain, unnoticed until it was everywhere and then sorely missed when absent. It was Jonas who asked, one evening beneath a sky soft with lavender clouds, if she would stay on a while longer. His voice was casual, but his eyes betrayed the hope stitched into every syllable. "I reckon the place runs smoother with you around," he said, scuffing his boot against the worn porch boards. "If you're willing." Rose Dunn looked out across the fields, where the last light of day painted the grasses silver and gold, and something deep inside her, something tired and bruised from too many goodbyes, whispered yes. They worked side by side in the soft-spoken companionship that needed no grandiose dungeons. Jonas showed her how to read the sky for coming storms, how to mend a harness with strong but patient stitches. Rose Dunn, in turn, taught him how to coax stubborn hens to lay in new coops, how to build a better fence that would bend but not break under the weight of the world. Somewhere along the way, without either of them daring to name it, trust bloomed between them. Trust, and something deeper still, something that tasted like the first bite of an apple ripened under the full mercy of the sun. It was during one of these days, a day fat with the smell of wet earth and honeysuckle, that the past came riding back into town on tired horses. Henry Dobbs, the blacksmith, had grown bitter with the passing weeks. Word of Rose Dunn's quiet resilience and growing place at Jonas Carter's side had reached his ears, twisting his pride into something sharp and cruel. He began to talk when he drank, and drink he did often. Rose Dunn heard it first from Mrs. Jensen at the general store, the way rumors slip into the ears of the undeserving. "Shame, really," Mrs. Jensen said, weighing flour in her scales. "A girl like that, latching on where she ain't wanted." Rose Dunn pretended not to hear, her hands steady even as her heart faltered. She said nothing of it to Jonas. Some wounds were too fresh to lay bare. But the words clung to her, invisible burrs catching on the fabric of her spirit, making her doubt the strength of the roots she had so carefully begun to grow. It was Jonas who noticed the change first, the way her laughter caught a little too soon in her throat, the way her shoulders bowed under an invisible weight. He found her by the paddock at twilight, leaning against the fence, her gaze lost somewhere beyond the gathering stars. "You hearin' the same fool talk I have?" he asked quietly, keeping his distance like a man approaching a wounded animal. Rose Dunn didn't answer, but the tilt of her chin, the tightness of her mouth, spoke well enough. Jonas drew a slow breath, setting his hat on the fence post beside him. "Folks'll talk," he said. "Ain't nothin' we can do to stop their tongues waggin'. But you ought to know, there ain't a soul's opinion in this town I hold higher than yours." Rose Dunn turned to him then, her eyes shimmering not with tears but with something fiercer, the ache of being truly seen and found worthy. "You don't have to fight my battles, Mr. Carter," she said softly. Jonas smiled, a crooked, beautiful thing. "Maybe not," he said. "But I reckon two folks walkin' side by side in this life ought to take turns carryin' the heavy end of the load." The words found their mark. Like seeds scattered on fertile ground, they sank deep and quietly began to bloom. That night, under the wild curve of the Milky Way, Rose Dunn found herself standing by the old oak tree behind the ranch house, the one Jonas had planted as a boy. Its branches stretched wide and stubborn against the sky, bearing witness to seasons of drought and flood and fire, and still it stood. Jonas came to her without a sound, carrying a small bundle wrapped in rough cloth. "I reckon you might need this," he said, offering it with the same easy grace he gave everything. Rose Dunn unfolded the bundle to find a book, well-worn, leather-soft with age. A collection of poetry, the words faded and loved into the very grain of the paper. "I know you favor the wildflowers," Jonas said, almost shy. "Figured you might like the words that bloomed too." She opened it carefully, running her fingers over the pages as if touching something sacred. The world tilted then, not in a dizzying rush, but in a slow, deliberate pivot, two roads crossing in a place no map could chart. She looked up at him, the book cradled to her chest, and saw not a rescuer, not a savior, but a man who knew how to stand with her, not over her. Their hands brushed once, twice, before settling together, fingers weaving into a promise neither of them dared to speak aloud yet. Above them, the stars burned ancient and bright, and the earth turned unseen beneath their feet, carrying them forward into a future still unwritten but no longer feared. Somewhere, far beyond the hills, storms rumbled, old hurts and bitter tongues gathering strength. But here, under the vast and forgiving sky, two souls had found each other, not in grand gestures or fiery DeRose Duntions, but in the quiet, steady choosing of one another, again and again. And as Rose Dunn Whitlock leaned her head against Jonas Carter's shoulder, feeling the steady thrum of life beneath his worn shirt, she knew with a certainty that could not be shaken. When two roads crossed, it wasn't always collision and ruin. Sometimes it was the beginning of home. The days quickened as planting season approached, each sunrise a soft summons to the earth and each sunset a lullaby sung in gold. Willow Creek, for all its sharp tongues and narrow ways, began to accept the slow truth that Rose Dunn Whitlock was no passing stranger, no half-healed drifter to pity. She was becoming something more enduring, the way wild roots became part of the land they dared to claim. But even in the warmth of new beginnings, the old cold bitterness found ways to creep in. It was Henry Dobbs who brought the storm. One evening, as the sky bruised purple with the coming night, Henry stood outside the town saloon, whiskey-fueled and ugly with resentment. Word had reached him of Jonas Carter's quiet courtship, of the way Rose Dunn's hand now rested easily against Jonas' arm, of the soft looks exchanged under wide prairie skies. Jealousy, pride, and the cowardice born of small souls twisted inside Henry until he could bear it no longer. The next day, when Rose Dunn rode into town for supplies, Henry stepped out into the road, blocking her path with a swaggering arrogance that drew immediate attention. Townsfolk peered from shop windows and doorways, the spring air heavy with anticipation. Thought you'd be smart enough to move along after I sent you packin', Henry said, his voice sharp and brittle. But I see you found yourself a bigger fool to take you in. Rose Dunn sat straight in the saddle, her hands steady on the reins, her face calm as the high blue sky. I found kindness, she said simply, her voice carrying clear across the gathering crowd. Something you wouldn't recognize if it was handed to you on a silver plate. Murmurs rippled through the street. Jonas, hearing the commotion from the blacksmith's yard, was there in a heartbeat, his long strides cutting through the gathering ring of spectators. He said nothing at first, simply stepping between Rose Dunn and Henry, the quiet wall of his presence a far greater warning than any raised voice. You've had your say, Jonas said at last, voice low enough to make Henry take an involuntary step back. Now you'll get out of her way. Henry sneered, muttered something about fools and charity cases, but under Jonas' unwavering gaze, he found his courage crumbling like dry clay. With a final curse spat at the dust, he turned and shouldered his way through the crowd, vanishing into the folds of the town he had stained with his bitterness. Jonas turned then not to the crowd but to Rose Dunn, his hand rising to her boot stirrup, steady and sure. You don't ever have to stand alone, Rose Dunn, he said, quiet enough that only she could hear. And Rose Dunn, blinking against the sting of unshed tears, realized that this, not grandiose dungeons or desperate dreams, was the kind of strength she had spent a lifetime longing for. They left town together under the arching canvas of a sky deepening toward twilight, the road unspooling before them like a promise made in wildflower threads and stitched by the setting sun. That evening, back at the Carter Ranch, Jonas brought Rose Dunn to the high hill overlooking the fields. A warm breeze stirred the grasses into a soft sea, and the first stars pricked through the veil of dusk. Jonas had built something there, simple but beautiful, an arch of rough-hewn wood twined with prairie flowers, standing tall against the endless sky. Rose Dunn stood breathless before it, her hand flying to her mouth. I reckoned if I was gonna ask a woman to stay by my side, Jonas said, voice thick with emotion he made no effort to hide, it ought to be under something as stubborn and beautiful as she is. He stepped closer, holding out a small band of silver, shaped not by a jeweler's delicate tools but by his own strong hands at the forge, hammered and polished with care only love could teach. I ain't rich in gold or land, Jonas said, his voice shaking just enough to make it truer. But I've got a heart that knows your worth. And a life that'll be better spent beside you than any place you could ride to alone. Rose Dunn's vision blurred with the rush of feeling, the flood of all the lonely years crashing against the sudden, unmovable wall of being truly seen, truly wanted. She placed her hand in his, not needing the words she could never shape big enough to hold what she felt. Their vows were simple, spoken not in grand halls but under a heaven crowded with stars, witnessed only by the earth they had both tilled and the sky that had watched over all their heartbreak and hope. I will stand with you, Jonas said, whether the winds tear at us or the rains drown the fields. I will walk beside you, Rose Dunn answered, whether the road rises easy or falls hard under our boots. And when they sealed their promises, it was not with fireworks or applause, but with a kiss that tasted of wild honey and fresh rain, of hard-fought dreams blooming at last. The town, too, could not help but bow to the undeniable rightness of it. The preacher's wife brought pies and the sheriff tipped his hat and even old Mrs. Jensen sniffled discreetly into her handkerchief as she laid a quilt over their marriage bed. The rumors dried up like shallow creeks in summer. Respect, like wildflowers once ignored, now bloomed in unexpected corners. Rose Dunn Whitlock Carter walked taller than ever through Willow Creek, not because she needed the world's approval, but because she had learned, with every blistered mile, with every lonely night survived, that she was never built wrong. She had simply been built to reach places few dared. One evening, not long after, Rose Dunn stood once more atop the hill, the same one where she'd spoken her vows, the arch still standing against the sky, weathered but unbroken. The sun spilled gold across the fields, and Jonas came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist with the ease of long habit. Still favor the wildflowers? He murmured against her ear. Always, she whispered, smiling as she leaned back into him. Below them, the world spun its slow, stubborn dance. Crops growing, babies born, storms weathered, grief and joy mingling like rivers feeding the same endless sea. And overhead, the sky stretched vast and wild, the place where their love had been promised and planted, growing ever upward, reaching in ways neither of them would have dared alone. Jonas kissed the crown of her head, murmuring a prayer older than words. The prairie wind answered, and somewhere, far beyond the curve of the earth, another wildflower took root. Because some loves are not measured by what they can fit into a small town's expectations. Some loves, like some souls, are built to reach the sky. And if ever you find yourself doubting, dear listener, remember this. There's a place for you too. Exactly as you are. Built high enough, strong enough, stubborn enough to touch the stars. The wind moaned low across the prairie, stirring dust and dead grass like ghosts too bitter to rest. Josie Bell's dress clung to her legs, damp with sweat and fear. Her hands, small and calloused, trembled as she gripped the coarse fabric of her apron. She kept her eyes fixed on the broken earth beneath her boots. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Beside her, her father adjusted the brim of his worn-out hat, eyes twitching toward the horizon. His knuckles were swollen, skin dry and cracked from years of hard whiskey and harder luck. He cleared his throat like a man trying to cough up his shame. A wagon rolled over the ridge, pulled by two sway-backed mules. It creaked with every bounce as if even the wheels were reluctant to come. Dust trailed it like a funeral march. On the bench sat a man built like a smokehouse, wide, heavy, with a thick gut that strained his vest and cheeks bloated like dough too long risen. Boone Ketchum. He didn't smile when he stopped the wagon. He smirked. His eyes, small and greedy, took in Josie Bell like he was weighing a hog for market. 18, right? Boone's voice was syrupy and thick, southern slurred. She's got a woman's hips. That'll do. Josie Bell clenched her jaw. Her father gave a stiff nod. She's healthy. Knows how to clean, cook 10 chickens. Never been touched. Boone's boot hit the dirt with a thud. He waddled closer, smelling of tobacco and sweat and something spoiled underneath. His hand reached out, fat fingers with cracked nails, and tilted Josie Bell's chin. Her eyes flashed up just once. Defiant. That alone made him chuckle. She's got some fire. I like 'em with a little fight. Makes it last longer. Her father didn't flinch. Just held out his hand. Boone slapped a pouch of coins into his palm. It jingled heavy. Deal's a deal. Something inside Josie Bell snapped like a taut string. She took a step back. You can't do this. Her father didn't meet her eyes. Ain't got a choice. You'll be fed. You'll have a roof. Better than starvin', dud. Better than being bought like a mule? Boone grabbed her arm. You'll learn to be grateful. She struggled. He yanked her hard enough to make her stumble. Her father looked away like maybe if he didn't watch it wasn't real. The wagon groaned again as Boone hoisted her up like luggage. She didn't scream. Wouldn't. She sat stiff and silent, hands clenched in her lap as the rancher climbed beside her, reins in one hand, his other resting on his gun like a warning. Her father stayed behind, counting coins. The prairie rolled by slow and cruel. Dry brush, buzzards circling something dead in the distance. The sun sat low, bleeding orange across the sky. Boone said nothing. Just whistled a slow, ugly tune between his teeth. They passed a ridge where a lone rider sat, still as stone, horse black as sin. His face was hidden beneath the shadow of a wide hat, but Josie Bell felt his eyes. Watching. Measuring. Boone spat toward the dirt. Stray cowpoke. They come and go. Don't matter. But Josie Bell's heart caught in her throat. That man hadn't just been there, he'd chosen to stay. To see. She didn't know why, but something in her gut twisted, and for the first time since she'd been sold, she felt something that almost tasted like hope. The ranch loomed like a scar on the land, gray wood, sun-warped and splintered, sagging under the weight of neglect. The hog pens were overgrown and the barn doors swung on rusted hinges. A pair of half-starved dogs barked weakly from under the porch. Boone pulled the wagon to a halt and clapped his belly. Home sweet hell. She didn't move. He yanked her down and pushed her toward the house. Don't go getting ideas. You're mine now. That means you do what I say when I say it and how I say it. Inside, the house stank of grease and loneliness. A skillet of something burnt sat cold on the stove. Dirty clothes littered the floor. The only sign of preparation was a cot with fresh sheets in the corner, her new prison. That night, she lay stiff under a scratchy wool blanket, eyes open in the dark. Her face throbbed where he'd backhanded her for refusing to cook. She didn't cry. Crying would make it real. Instead, she whispered to herself, My name is Josie Bell Langley. I ain't nobody's thing. I ain't his. The next morning, the sky was gray and low, thunder rolling in the distance like distant drums. Boone stormed in drunk, shouting for eggs and bacon. She did what she was told, quiet, watching his every move like a snake watches a boot. Outside, she fed the pigs, milked the lone goat, scrubbed the floor with her sleeves rolled to her elbows. She worked without rest. He grunted approval. Maybe you'll earn your keep after all. She stole moments, on the porch, beneath the clothesline, or while hanging laundry, to scan the horizon. No sign of the man on the ridge. Maybe she'd imagined him. But one evening, just as the sun kissed the hills and the sky burned red, she heard hoofbeats. Boone was asleep in his chair, snoring like a sawmill. Josie Bell stepped out, heart hammering. The cowboy was back. He rode slow, reins loose in one hand. A rifle was slung across his back. Dust clung to his coat. He stopped at the gate and tipped his hat. Boone jerked awake and stumbled outside, gun already in hand. "Who the hell are you?" The cowboy didn't flinch. "Name's Elijah. Heard you had horses. Looking to buy." Boone scowled. "I don't sell." "Trade then." He looked at Josie Bell. Elijah's eyes followed, quiet and unreadable. Boone huffed. "She's mine. I asked about horses." They stared. Silence stretched like a drawn bowstring. Then Boone laughed, loud and cruel. "You got grit, I'll give you that. Got coin too." Josie Bell stood rooted. Her hands were trembling again, but not from fear. Something else. Something wild. Elijah tied his horse and stepped down. Josie Bell noticed the dust on his boots, the way he moved, like a man who'd fought too many fights and won just enough to keep going. Over supper, Boone bragged, spat tobacco, and slurred half-truths. Elijah listened. Didn't say much. Just watched. Watched her. That night, Josie Bell sat in the dark again. The wind howled outside. She touched the bruise on her cheek and whispered, "He saw me. He saw me." And out there in the blackness, on the edge of the ranch, a man named Elijah stood watch. He wasn't sure yet why he'd stayed. But she was. Because sometimes, even in a land this cruel, a quiet shadow could mean the difference between being owned and being free. The morning after Elijah came and left, Josie Bell scrubbed the porch steps until her fingers bled. Boone had been in a foul mood, jealous, suspicious. He didn't like the way the cowboy looked at her. Or maybe it was how Josie Bell had looked back. Boone wasn't a smart man, but he wasn't blind either. Something had shifted, and he could feel it like a storm brewing on the edge of his land. "You keep your eyes down when there's company," he growled, flinging a pan across the floor when breakfast was too cold for his liking. "Ain't no one interested in a girl with bruises and sass." Josie Bell kept quiet. She'd learned early when to speak, when to duck, and when to stare at the wall like it could open up and swallow her whole. Still, she never stopped watching the horizon. Each day was a copy of the last, gray, long, and stifling. The chores were endless. Boone reeked of whiskey and sweat. At night, he snored through the walls, and Josie Bell stared at the ceiling, whispering her name to herself so she wouldn't forget it. But she found a strange sort of companionship in a mutt named Whiskey, an old ranch dog with one ear and a limp. He followed her from pen to coop to well. Sometimes she talked to him. "Reckon you been here longer than me," she murmured one day, brushing his matted coat. "Ever think about biting him in his sleep?" Whiskey thumped his tail. "I'll bake you a pie if you do." Boone, meanwhile, was still talking about Elijah days after he'd gone. "Cowboys like that don't stick around," he said, polishing his gun at the kitchen table. "Think they're better than the rest of us. All quiet, all noble. Ain't nothing noble about the trail. It makes bastards out of everyone." Josie Bell said nothing, but she held on to Boone's words. Because a week later, Elijah came back. This time he didn't stop at the gate. He rode straight up to the porch. "I'll work for feed and a dry place to sleep," Elijah said, his voice low and even. 3 weeks. Then I move on." Boone eyed him suspiciously but agreed one out. "Fine. The barn's yours. You muck the stalls, fix the fencing, and keep your eyes off my woman. I'm not here for trouble." That better be true. From the barn window, Elijah could see her hanging laundry. Her sleeves were rolled high, bruises painting her arms like ink. She moved like someone twice her age, tired, practiced, but never fully beaten. He fixed fences, chopped wood, repaired a squealing door Boone had ignored for years. And Josie Bell watched him, always from a distance, always careful. They didn't speak much, not at first. But their silences held more meaning than most people's words. One evening, Josie Bell brought out water in a tin cup. "You'll get blisters swinging that axe wrong," she said, nodding to his hands. "I've had worse. Still, no good if you can't lift your arms come winter." He took the cup. "Thanks." She didn't leave. He didn't ask her to. "I had a brother once," she said, eyes on the setting sun. "He ran off to join the army when I was 10. Sent one letter. Died in some war I never understood." Elijah nodded. "I had a sister. She married a man who used his fists when words failed. By the time I got there, he buried her behind the barn. Said she slipped on the steps. Her hand tightened around her apron." "Did he?" No. They didn't speak again for days. But something had settled between them, something raw and honest, born from pain they didn't have to explain. Boone took notice. He drank more, grew louder, slammed doors. One night he accused Josie Bell of offering herself to Elijah. "You think I don't see it? That look in your eye when he walks past." "There's nothing to see," Josie Bell said quietly. He raised a hand. Elijah was on the porch before it fell. Boone turned with a sneer. "You think you're some kind of hero? Back off, cowboy. She's mine." "I'm not here for your woman," Elijah said, voice calm. "I'm here for the horses. The work. Then stick to it." Later that night, Josie Bell sat behind the chicken coop, hugging her knees. Her lip was split. Her pride worse. Elijah found her there, holding an old kerchief to her mouth. "Should have stayed gone," she whispered. "I couldn't." "You gonna fight him next time?" "Only if you ask me to." She looked up. "And if I don't?" "Then I wait." She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "That's stupid." "Maybe. But it's your call." He handed her a small pocket knife. "Keep it. Just in case." She took it. Her fingers lingered on his. The next few days passed with a quiet hum of tension. Boone was quieter, watching them like a snake. Elijah slept light, hand always near his belt. Josie Bell moved through each day like someone walking across ice, careful, ready for it to crack. One afternoon, while drawing water, Josie Bell turned to find Boone standing right behind her. His breath reeked. "You think I don't know?" he hissed. "You think I ain't seen the way he looks at you?" She stepped back. "You forget who bought you." "I remember," she said softly. "Every day." He lunged. She stabbed. The little knife tore a shallow line across his forearm. Boone roared, grabbed her by the hair, and dragged her screaming into the house. Elijah heard it all. By the time he got inside, Boone had locked her in the cellar. "You got no say in this," Boone slurred, waving a pistol. "You're lucky I don't put a bullet in you too." But Elijah wasn't listening anymore. He turned and walked out. Not away but toward the barn. The rain came hard that night. Thunder cracked like gunfire across the prairie. The wind howled, slamming shutters. In the cellar, Josie Bell sat in the dark, hugging whiskey for warmth. Water pooled beneath the door. The smell of mold and old roots filled her nose. Above her, footsteps. The door creaked. "Elijah? Back up." She did. The door burst open. A hand reached down. When she stepped out into the storm, he was already loading Boone's pistol. He pressed it into her palm. "You sure?" She looked down at the gun. Then at the door. "No," she said. "But I won't be locked up again." They waited. Boone stumbled out minutes later, shirt half open, hair plastered to his face with rain. "What the hell?" Josie Bell stepped forward. "It's over." He froze. "Put it down," he growled. She didn't. "Elijah," he barked, "tell her." Elijah said nothing. "I'll kill you both," Boone spat. "No," Josie Bell said. "You won't." The thunder rolled. Boone lunged. The gun fired. The echo tore through the ranch, louder than the storm. Boone dropped to his knees. Not dead, just shot in the leg. Elijah kicked the weapon away before he could reach it. Josie Bell stood over him, breathing hard. "I wasn't born for this," she whispered. "But I sure as hell won't die in it." Boone howled as the rain turned red in the dirt. They left him there. Left the ranch. Left everything. Except whiskey. As they rode away under the dark clouds, Josie Bell didn't look back. Elijah rode beside her in silence. She didn't ask where they were headed. Didn't need to. The only thing she knew was this. For the first time in a long time, the road ahead was hers to choose. They rode west beneath a sky bruised with storm clouds, the wind tugging at their clothes like cold fingers. Josie Bell held the reins tighter than she needed to, not out of fear but to feel in control. For once. Elijah rode beside her, silent, watching the road but never straying far. The trail was cruel. Dry. Endless. Rattlesnakes coiled beneath rocks. Vultures circled. Water grew scarce. By the second night, Josie Bell's hands were raw and blistered from riding. Her back ached. But she never complained. They made camp by a dry creek bed. Elijah started a fire with practiced ease. Josie Bell sat across from him, whiskey curled against her legs. "Where are we headed?" she finally asked. "Nowhere in particular," he said. "Just away." She stared into the flames. "That used to scare me. Still does. A little less each day." The fire cracked, throwing shadows on her face. She looked older already. Not aged but shaped. Hardened. A girl who'd been sold like livestock now held a revolver at her side and slept under the stars. Elijah handed her a canteen. We can follow the old cattle trail south. There's a town 2 days out, Dry Fork. Quiet. Might be work there. Work for you or work for me? He raised an eyebrow. I mean it, she said. I'm not looking for a hero. I've had enough men try and fix me. I'll earn my way. Just, don't try to own me. I won't, he said. And she believed him. The next morning they ran into trouble. 3 riders appeared near midday, dust-streaked, lean, with pistols low on their hips and eyes that didn't smile. They blocked the trail like they were the law, though Josie Bell saw right through it. Afternoon, the leader called, nodding at Elijah. Trail tax. Tax? Elijah asked. Yup. You're using our dirt. Gonna cost you. Elijah didn't reach for his gun. He didn't even twitch. You're outnumbered, the man warned. Josie Bell spoke up. So are you. They laughed, until they saw the fire in her eyes. The tension cracked like lightning. One rider twitched. Elijah moved faster. 2 shots. 2 men fell. The third took off, screaming through the brush. Josie Bell stood frozen, revolver in hand, though she hadn't fired. Elijah holstered his calmly, stepped to her side. You all right? She nodded. I think so. You shook. Yeah. Good. Means you're still human. They buried the bodies shallow, beneath thornbrush. Josie Bell didn't flinch at the sight of blood anymore. She tied her hair back and helped dig. That night they didn't make a fire. Just lay in silence under the stars, listening for hooves that never came. By the 3rd day, Dry Fork shimmered on the horizon like a mirage. Just a handful of buildings, 1 saloon, a stable, and a blacksmith shop with a busted sign. The town looked tired, like it hadn't had news in months. They stabled their horses. Elijah traded a silver ring for 2 nights in the inn above the saloon. Josie Bell didn't ask where he got it. She didn't need to know. She found work scrubbing floors and serving drinks. Elijah helped mend fences on a nearby ranch. The days passed slowly. Nights even slower. People stared. Whispered. A girl traveling alone with a man like Elijah didn't sit right with them. Too quiet. Too pretty. Too proud. But no one said it to her face. One night, a ranch hand cornered her behind the saloon. Girl, like you don't belong out here alone. She turned calm. I'm not alone. He grabbed her wrist. Don't be stupid. You could come stay with me. I got a room. You could do better. Elijah stepped from the shadows. The man laughed, raising his hands. Easy. Just talking, is all. Josie Bell's voice was ice. Talk somewhere else. The man backed off. Josie Bell turned to Elijah. You weren't gonna stop him? I was waiting to see if you wanted to stop him yourself. She blinked, then smiled. I did. They left Dry Fork 3 days later. Josie Bell had enough coin for supplies, and Elijah had a new scar along his shoulder, a gift from falling off a rickety roof while fixing the barn. She stitched it herself, cursing softly, hands steady. Most men wouldn't let a girl sew them up, she teased. Most men bleed more that way. They rode on, the land growing wilder. Hills turned to canyons. Cacti stood like silent sentries. At dusk, the sky burned violet. Coyotes howled from distant ridges. Josie Bell talked more now. Laughed sometimes. She told stories, about the time she fell into a well as a child, about her mother's cinnamon bread, about her dream of having land she could call hers. What would you do with land? Elijah asked one night. Plant peach trees. Raise chickens. Maybe teach girls how to shoot. I'd stay for that. She looked across the firelight. Would you? His silence was answer enough. Then came the fire. They camped near an abandoned homestead, stone chimney, collapsed roof, scattered tools half buried in weeds. Josie Bell liked the place. Said it had character. They made a fire, hung wet clothes to dry, even laughed over burnt beans. Then Elijah heard the horses. Riders. For maybe 5. Moving fast. Josie Bell's face turned stone cold. The one who got away. Elijah grabbed the rifle. Get to cover. But she didn't run. The men came fast, shouting, guns raised. The lead rider wore a grin and a scar down his chin. Thought you could kill my boys and vanish? He barked. Elijah fired first. The fight was chaos. Flashes of fire, screams, pounding hooves. Josie Bell shot one in the shoulder. Elijah dropped another near the well. Then the lantern spilled. Flames leapt up the side of the ruined house. Wind caught the blaze, tossing sparks like knives. The whole world turned orange in smoke. Josie Bell dragged Elijah behind the chimney. He was bleeding, grazed bad in the thigh. She tore her sleeve, tied the wound, and stood guard while he loaded a fresh round. The last man tried to sneak up from the rear. Josie Bell caught him. One shot. Silence. The fire raged behind them, lighting the night like judgment. Josie Bell stood alone in the glow, smoke curling through her hair, pistol still warm in her grip. She looked like a legend. Later, when the fire died to embers, they sat side by side in the ashes. Elijah winced as he shifted. "You okay?" she asked. "I'll live." "You always say that." He looked at her. "You didn't run. Didn't feel like running. You saved me. You'd have done the same." They didn't speak for a while. The stars overhead were sharp and cold. "I used to think I'd die in a house like that," she said, nodding at the smoldering ruins. "Chained to someone like Boone. Screaming where no one could hear me. And now," she turned to him, "now I'm the one holding the gun." And for the first time Elijah smiled. Not a flicker. A real one. Because she wasn't the girl he'd met on that porch anymore. She was something else now. Something forged. A survivor. They lay beside the dying fire, the scent of smoke and blood around them. Whiskey snored at their feet. Elijah dozed. Josie Bell stayed awake, watching the embers dance. She wasn't afraid of the trail ahead. Not anymore. By the time they reached the Rio Piedra, Josie Bell had learned the rhythm of the trail. When to ride slow, when to let the horse drink, how to feel weather changing in her bones before it ever showed in the sky. She'd stopped flinching at sudden sounds. Stopped asking for permission to speak. She had her own saddle now, a pistol that felt like part of her hand, and a name that rolled off her tongue like thunder. Josie Bell Langley. Not anyone's daughter. Not anyone's wife. Just her. Elijah healed slower than he let on. His limp was worse after long days in the saddle, but he never complained. Josie Bell noticed, though. She started scouting ahead more, taking the lead without asking. Sometimes he'd smile and let her. Other times he'd challenge her. Either way, he never made her feel small. Their trail curved south toward the borderlands, open country where the law wore a different face depending on the town. They stopped in Rosita for supplies. A dusty, wind-bitten place with a saloon and a church standing across from each other like two old enemies. Josie Bell traded a rabbit pelt for a proper belt holster. Elijah got whiskey and bullets. The shopkeep gave them both odd looks, especially her. "You ride with him?" he asked, squinting. "I ride for myself. Not many girls do. I'm not many girls." They left at dawn, headed toward the flats. Just as the hills turned blue in the distance, they came upon it, a ranch in ruins. Burned fence posts. Scattered bones. Wind howling through an empty cabin frame. Josie Bell dismounted without a word, eyes fixed. "Boone's place," she whispered. They'd made a wide loop. Unintentionally. Or maybe not. Elijah stayed behind, letting her walk it alone. Josie Bell stepped over blackened timber and into what used to be the living room. The cot was gone. The walls were gone. But the memory remained. Her voice echoed in the silence. "I thought this was the end of my story," she murmured. "Turns out it was the start." She found the iron ring Boone used to bolt the cellar shut, half buried in dirt. Pulled it free, tossed it into the fire pit with a hiss. Elijah finally spoke. "He ain't here anymore. But ghosts don't stay gone unless you send them off." "I'm not afraid of ghosts," Josie Bell said. "I carry worse inside me." That night they camped a mile out, where prairie met pine. Josie Bell sat sharpening her knife, staring into the fire. "You ever think about stopping?" she asked. "Stopping what?" "The road. The fighting. Just having something quiet." "All the time," Elijah said. "But I don't know what quiet looks like anymore." Josie Bell stared into the flames. "I do. It's a porch with creaky steps, peach trees out back, chickens running wild. And a shotgun by the door just in case." He looked at her, long and thoughtful. "You think I fit in that picture? I think you'd build the steps." In the dark, their hands found each other. No promises. Just warmth. By morning there were tracks in the dust. Fresh. Wagon wheels headed east. Too clean to be traders. Elijah knelt, studying them. "Military?" "No," Josie Bell said, crouching beside him. "Too fast. Too deep. Bounty hunters." "They after us?" She shook her head. "Not yet. But they're close." They rode hard through the flats, sleeping only in shifts. By the second night they caught up. The bounty hunters had set camp in a gully, smoke trailing lazy into the air. Josie Bell and Elijah crept close, watched from the rocks above. 7 men. Armed. Drinking. One had a poster in his hand. Josie Bell narrowed her eyes. That's me. Elijah looked. The sketch was crude, but it bore her name. Josie Bell Langley. Wanted for the attempted murder of Boone Ketchum. She exhaled slow. He lived. Elijah's jaw clenched. He lied to the sheriff. Flipped the story. Of course he did. Still want to run? Josie Bell didn't answer. She stood. No. I want to finish it. They waited for nightfall. When the last fire burned low and laughter faded, they moved in, quick, quiet. Josie Bell's heart pounded, but her hands were steady. One man got up to piss. Elijah took him down with the butt of his rifle. Another woke too soon. Josie Bell shot him before he could scream. The camp exploded in chaos. Gunfire lit the dark. Sparks flew. One hunter grabbed Josie Bell from behind. She drove her elbow into his gut, spun, and fired into his chest. Elijah took 2 bullets but stayed on his feet, bleeding, relentless. The last hunter threw down his gun, begging for mercy. Josie Bell stepped forward, blood on her face, boots soaked in dust. Who sent you? Letter came from Boone, the man stammered. Said you were dangerous. Said you ran with a killer. She leveled her revolver at his forehead. Elijah touched her arm. He's done. She held his gaze. Then lowered the gun. They left the man sobbing in the dirt. Took supplies, burned the rest. Elijah collapsed by the creek. Josie Bell tended his wounds with whiskey and bandages, biting down her fear. His breath was shallow, but his eyes stayed open. You're gonna live, she whispered. I know. You better. He managed a crooked grin. Still owe you peach trees. 2 days later, they crossed the border into New Mexico territory. No lawmen. No posters. Just silence and sky. They found a bluff overlooking a river, wind rustling tall grass around them. Josie Bell stood with her hands on her hips, eyes scanning the land. This is it, she said. Right here. For what? For starting over. Elijah looked at her. You sure? She nodded. I've run enough. Time to build something. He dismounted, stood beside her. What do we build first? A porch. He laughed. She smiled. Later that evening, Josie Bell sat by the fire, notebook in hand. She didn't write much. Just a few words. Josie Bell Langley. Rancher. Shooter. Survivor. Free. The stars blinked above like they were listening. She turned to the audience, her voice low, steady. Folks will tell you the West don't care who you are. That it swallows girls like me whole. But I spit it right back. I bled, I broke, I burned, and I came through standing. The wind picked up, carrying her words. And if you're out there lost, thinking no one sees you, remember this. The trail don't own you. The scars don't define you. And sometimes the quietest cowboy carries the loudest storm. Behind her, Elijah stirred, still breathing. Still alive. And beside him, Josie Bell Langley faced the dawn. Unbroken.